Well, welcome everyone. During our webinar in February, Kim Runk from the Operations Proving Ground provided some of the key concepts for understanding the fundamentals of healthy organizational culture and some tips for navigating change initiatives. He led us through Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats methodology and demonstrated how that can be a useful tool for structuring facilitated, productive debate about the potential benefits and challenges of a change proposal. And I provided a handout to help plan a similar dialogue in your office. Well, at the end of the session, Kim briefly mentioned that Professor John Kotter's 8-step model for leading change can be a valuable guideline for planning and executing a change project, as well as for monitoring and making adjustments along the way. Kim said he's a fan of the model because it's based on decades of extensive research and it's been successfully implemented in organizations of all types and sizes, and it's pretty easy to understand and apply. That said, one of the problems with presenting these types of processes is that people frequently have difficulty connecting the dots between the generic academic model and applying the principles to a real problem, something that you guys can relate to. So we thought it might be helpful to share an example of how this could be applied in the Weather Service. So today we have with us Andy Bailey and Kim Runk, who are going to walk us through an example of how one WFO applied the Kotter model in the context of building support for and implementing a change initiative, and one that represented a pretty significant modification to their concept of operations. So with that foundation, I'll turn it over to Kim and Andy.
Thanks, Christina. I'm really excited to be invited back, and I'm equally excited to spend a few minutes and have my longtime friend Andy Bailey share his story with you. A little bit of background. Prior to 2013, Pleasant Hill office that covers the Kansas City area was still operating under a sort of a traditional model with respect to the way they distributed forecast functions. They ran a short-term desk and a long-term desk and a public service desk. And they really wanted to break free of that and explore some alternative options that might help them sort of maximize workflow and allow them to do some things that they wanted to concentrate time on. And the long-term specific goal was to create a separate shift that was focused on delivering services and messaging directly related to impact-based decision support. So one of the chief architects of that idea and the implementation plan eventually was Andy Bailey, the WCM. And I realized there are probably dozens of offices now that have implemented some form, some variation of this. But in 2013, it was a new idea. It was a pretty radical idea and one that posed a significant disruption of the status quo. So we thought that might be instructive as a case study, as Christina mentioned, in terms of presenting an application of the Kotter model to a change proposal that's familiar to the world many of you live in. So Andy, I'm going to admit to being both disappointed and encouraged. Right? Okay. The disappointment part comes from the fact that you and I spent hours talking about the Kotter model when we were both in Las Vegas. And if I remember right, you left Las Vegas in like 2006 or 2007, something like that. So like 4 or 5 years later, when you're wanting to implement a change, it didn't occur to you to plan ahead for how can we sort of integrate the Kotter model into this process. But the encouraging part is maybe it was sort of subconsciously there, because when you did work through the change, it turns out the Kotter model was an effective formula for you to work things through.
Jeez, Kim, you kind of put me on the spot here. Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, we you and I both read the book. We discussed it at length. I think part of it is that maybe that's part of the beauty of the Kotter model is when you're coming up with those roadblocks, and I don't know if it was subconscious or not, but the things that need to be done sort of become apparent, right? Depending on where you're at. I guess I don't know how to answer that as to whether or not this was something that was subconscious or just kind of dumb lucked into it. Probably the latter, to be honest, right? But
right. Well, that's okay. But the important thing is the application of it was useful. It really did work when you implemented an important change to your operations. So we'll just leave it at that.
Well, sometimes maybe the purpose of my life, I wonder, is if it's to serve as a warning to others. Maybe learn from my mistakes and plan it out in the future. Yeah.
So, Andy, before we even start, is there anything you feel that might be important as, sort of background before we dig into how your process followed the Kotter model?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ken. A couple of things. First of all, I'd love to be able to say that we were really ahead of the game and wrote down an extensive plan dealing with all of Kotter's 8 steps. We were familiar with his work, but we didn't, and we probably should have, we didn't sit down and really have a thorough plan to work our way through all of the 8 steps. Now, on the upside, I think that allowed us to kind of use our best judgment as we're going along, and roadblocks came up to try to overcome them. But we probably could have done a better job with planning. The other thing I want to highlight is we've always been blessed at Pleasant Hill to have an incredibly talented staff. Our operations folks are top-notch, very dedicated. But it's important not to mistake the talents of the staff for a hunger for change. They may have been very talented, but they were pretty satisfied doing what we were doing with short-term, long-term, and it was a radical change for them at the time, and wasn't necessarily initially well received.
Okay, that's good to remember for all of us, I think, the distinction between talent and openness to change. Okay, that's great. So let's get into the Kotter model description. Maybe in the interest of efficiency, we could sort of tackle this in chunks. So the first 3 steps of the Kotter model are sometimes merged under the heading creating a climate for change. And the specific steps, as you recall, are create a sense of urgency, form a guiding coalition, and then craft a compelling vision. So walk us through how you sort of addressed, whether intentionally or by accident, those initial steps: sense of urgency, guiding coalition, compelling vision, during the rollout of this DSS shift idea.
Sure. To create the sense of urgency, I'd say as far back as 2011, 2012, in that time frame, we started having pretty candid discussions with the forecast staff about the sort of limited gains we were making in our extended forecast efforts, in the grids, making changes to a lot of the forecast parameters 6-7 days out. It wasn't bearing a lot of fruit as far as improving the quality of the forecast. Our partners certainly weren't able to change their actions based on those kind of minor changes we were made. And we put it out there that we may be not making the best use of our time. And again, back in 2012, this wasn't really well received. And one of the things the staff told us is that, their level of science is up here, and we're trying, and it sounds like we're trying to take the science out of it and really diminish what they're doing. And that wasn't the case. We really were more focused on, let's use your time a lot more effectively and efficiently in ways that will better benefit our partners. And so those discussions went on for probably a year to 18 months, and at least got our forecast staff kind of thinking about, were they effective? Were we just kind of wasting our time in the grids? And so after having those discussions for a while, we had fairly routine management team meetings, and we had been discussing this, and we were kind of like, well, it's time to kind of get off the fence. We're talking about they're not using their time the best with the extended grids. So what are we going to ask them to do? So we put our heads together, myself and the MIC, and we came up with a list of activities, things that could be done on shift instead. And so we decided first of all, since we're trying to limit time in the extended grids, let's just have one person be responsible for all of the grids, and they can spend their time how they think they can make the most impact in the grid, since they probably don't have time to touch every grid out to 7 days. And then for the other of our two shift forecasters, they would be doing decision support and communications type things. So we laid out, we came up with something that's now called in Central Region the Situation Report, which is more of like a graphical hazardous weather outlook. I guess you could think of it like that. We talked about increasing our efforts in social media, because at that time we only had 1, 2, maybe 3 people making social media posts. We wanted everybody to be communicating on every shift. And then also we had been doing event support remotely for our emergency managers for a couple of years with the Google Calendar, but we decided we wanted to combine all of those actions or those efforts that are more communications based into one shift for one of our 2 operational meteorologists to be doing during the day. And that really, the management team really was the guiding coalition. We were unified and united in our belief that this plan was a necessary evolution for our office and really represented where the agency was going. So yeah, that's really kind of the importance of that guiding coalition is we were united, and we were all communicating the same thing to the staff. And then finally, step 3 is creating a compelling vision. Remember, back in the sense of urgency when we're having those candid discussions, the staff told us that we were removing the science from the process, and they felt like their scientific process was up here and we were bringing it down there. And what we told them is, our goal isn't to lower your scientific abilities. We want to take your communications ability that's down here and raise it to the level of your science. So our vision was really pretty simple. That the change was aimed at raising the bar and raising the level of our communication ability to that of our scientific ability. And that's really what we work to do over the coming years.
That's great stuff. So I am curious about the manner in which the communication then happened, because obviously with that kind of a change and that sort of process in helping people understand, you must have sort of stepped up, I don't know, number of meetings or how you met or how you communicate, but maybe that can happen in the context of this next chunk. So the next group would be sort of the steps 4, 5, and 6. Sometimes they're summarized as something like engage and enable, and that means engaging the entire group that's impacted. So it sort of represents an intentional effort to help the staff, in your case, understand, specific roles, solicit ideas for how to achieve the primary benefits, free them up to be innovative about introducing new practices themselves, or and particularly recognizing and celebrating victories that happen along the way when somebody took that initiative. So in Kotter's model, the specific steps are communicate the vision, empower broad-based action, and celebrate short-term wins. So I wonder if you could just sort of speak about those aspects of your change initiative at Pleasant Hill.
Sure, yeah. The first thing we did to communicate the vision is we met with the local NWSTC steward. We wanted to make sure that they had a chance to provide input, express concerns, and we incorporated the input that the steward did provide. We wanted to make sure they're on board, it was negotiated, that sort of thing. The next thing we did is both management and the steward met with the lead forecast staff. We did that off-site. We presented the plan. We shared the vision, talking about raising the level of the communications to that of the level of quality of their science. And this communications with the leads occurred a full 3 months before we were proposed to implement. And that was important because that allowed for frequent communications. We were able to answer a lot of questions. We were able to incorporate some of the feedback from the leads into the communications further. We then communicated it to the entire staff. We talked about the sorts of things that needed to happen, and there was a little resistance. It wasn't that strong though. But we also continued over those next 3 months candid conversations about where the agency was going, and what we needed to do to get there, the kinds of changes we needed to make, because where we were at was not where we were going to end up. And quite frankly, what we told them is, you can either decide how we're going to change, or somebody else is going to decide that for us, and they're they're going to force the change upon us. And we all, I think, would much rather be in the driver's seat when it comes to something like that. This also led to extensive discussions of our role in the grid editing and the production. And as I mentioned, we've been talking about that for a couple of years. And there was quite a bit of concern about, well, how are we going to make sure our grids are good for the full 7 days? And how are we going to collaborate full 7 days with one person doing it with our offices? So, again, we continue to have those discussions. When it came to actual implementation, this is kind of the empower the broad-based action. While management basically provided the overall framework for what we were going to do with a grid forecaster or a forecaster and an IDSS meteorologist, we left it up to the staff to figure out and really decide how they were going to make that work. The day-to-day decisions, oftentimes for the implementation, were led by the lead forecaster, and the division of duties was pretty firm, but how they accomplished that was really up to them. And the other thing, especially initially, management made themselves available, especially with complex weather scenarios. If we're looking at a winter storm, it was difficult for a forecaster to do all those things that a grid forecaster would have to do to deal with the winter storm, especially with the collaboration and the extra products that were issued. So we made sure that we were available to go out and help out anytime we needed to. It wasn't always smooth. In fact, we got off to an extremely rocky start. The day we implemented, the day we started, was 1 or 2 days before a major winter storm. And so it wasn't like we were able to ease into it with high pressure and sunny skies for several days. It was kind of trial by fire, and it did cause quite a bit of stress, at least initially. In fact, the staff came to us the day we were going to start this and asked to kick the can down the road a couple of weeks. We said, no, we're going to hold to it. Do the best you can. And again, the management was there to help out as they needed. And as it turned out, while it was a little stressful initially, it did work out well. That kind of gets us on to step 6 and celebrating those short-term wins. Frankly, the wins were plentiful. We had so much positive feedback from our partners that they really liked the kinds of things we were doing, both with the sit rep as well as with the specialized event report. And then our social media numbers just went through the roof when we were posting consistently and we were working on the quality of our posts. Everything was just coming together. So I made it a point to, any time we got positive feedback from a partner, I'd either forward the email directly to the staff and say, great job, keep it up, that sort of thing. Occasionally a partner would call and just give me a verbal, hey, that was fantastic. Several times I'd ask to put them on hold and go out and let them tell the staff directly out in operations. Those sort of kudos went a long way to kind of help forecasters understand that the efforts they were making were being noticed by our partners, and they were certainly being appreciated. Those large strides we made in social media, we highlighted posts that went viral that were impactful for our the various kinds of hazardous weather we had, and forecasters took great pride in that, being able to craft a message that was well received and actionable by the public, and it really helped. In addition to the short-term wins, though, we also listened to our forecasters as far as what things they felt weren't working. We worked to get rid of things that we had initially implemented that really didn't turn out to be that effective. One of them was we were doing daily recorded briefings, and I think initially it wasn't on YouTube yet. It was just on our webpage. But once we went to YouTube with those briefings, we found out we were only getting like between 5 and 10 views a day, and it was a lot of work for our forecasters to produce this. So we're like, fine, that's fine. We're not going to have you guys do that, because again, the whole purpose of this was having them work more effectively. So we got rid of them, and that was much appreciated. For them, the forecasters, they viewed that as a win, a short-term win. We tried it, it didn't work, so we got rid of it. And that's kind of important when you're doing this change, all this change stuff too, is oftentimes we just add things to their plates. You really need to focus on what you can take away and how you can make things easier, and just, again, help them find ways that they can be more effective as well.
Yeah, that's really an important point. I appreciate you bringing that out. Yeah, it's brilliant. The ways that you intentionally took time and paid attention toward getting everyone involved and making sure they had a stake in the outcome and they had a say in how it sort of progressed. That's really impressive. In fact, I really think that's the key to building a sense of buy-in and ownership of the change. So that leads us into the final two steps that are, implementing and sustaining the change proposal. So that would be step 7, which is building on those short-term wins and, strengthening momentum to maintain commitment to, through sometimes what are some obstacles after you've been in the process for a while. And then finally anchoring that change into the organizational culture. So this is who we are and how we operate, after a certain amount of time. So you recall any occurrences of that, using those wins, to further build momentum, and what are your thoughts about whether the change has genuinely evolved to the point where, this is part of our DNA as an office?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Our forecasters, because of the emphasis on IDSS, were naturally getting more interactions remotely with our partners, but we wanted to get them meeting our partners face-to-face more and more. And so we worked to get at least the staff members who were interested out to attending meetings, initially with myself to some of the partner meetings, but eventually going out on their own. For instance, I've got a lead forecaster that runs our Storm Ready program. He does everything, all the work. So he obviously has quite a bit of interaction. He's got a team of 2 other forecasters that work with him to work on the whole Storm Ready program for me. And so that was a way that just to help further strengthen the partner forecaster relationships. We also worked to deploy folks other than the SU and WCM to on-site DSS. We looked for opportunities for that to happen and very rapidly got to the point where our forecasters went out far more than either the SU or myself to be deployed on site. And that was beneficial too, because the forecasters loved working directly with the partners. They got immediate feedback on what was important. And they also felt good about the fact that they were, competent and able and comfortable providing the on-site DSS. And that really strengthened us, as we got into the last couple of years here, where we need deployable meteorologists. Everybody, when we went through the training push for IDSS, everybody was grandfathered in our staff to be deployable. And so that was really a benefit for the office. After that, to continue building on the strength, we had a new regional director at the time. Chris Strager had just come on, and our management team had a call with him. And we asked him about perhaps having a Central Region demonstration project where we expand our efforts beyond just our office and included 3 more offices that would include backup pairs so that we could find ways to back each other up, because everything we were doing at the time, we couldn't be backed up by another office. And that's obviously a big limitation if our partners are counting on those sort of things. He agreed. We worked with Mike Hudson and the Services Division in Central Region, and we brought the National Weather Services offices in Springfield, Topeka, and St. Louis on board. And the 4 of us came together to decide what we were going to do and how we were going to spread these services to their office and also make it so we could back each other up. And that really strengthened what we had been doing quite a bit, not only from a continuity of operations standpoint, but just each one of those offices brought new things to the table that just made our efforts that much better. And that initial work with that demonstration eventually led to the first Central Region roadmap for IDSS that was implemented a few years back. During that whole process, our staff took a huge amount of pride in knowing that they were a part of this early work in IDSS. And so that just kind of helped further build commitment and momentum towards this change. And, the thing that's been exciting to me in the last couple of years is rather than management leading the change, more and more it's been our staff that's been leading the change. And I'll give you an example for that. I think it was roughly 2 years ago, the staff came up with a schedule because they wanted to have, we had talked about having blue sky shifts or days where the weather's quiet, sending a forecaster out to meet with partners. The problem with that is you really can't, you can't plan on that, because 3 weeks ahead of time, if you're trying to schedule something with an emergency manager, you may or may not be able to leave the office. Well, our forecasters came up with a schedule that in the schedule itself, there were 5, Monday through Friday, there was a partner engagement shift every Monday through Friday, 10 months out of the year. And those were shifts for a forecaster to schedule things with the partners. If they had to participate or in planning or an actual exercise, they could count on their shift being available. If they had storm ready work, they could do that. They could go out and meet with new partners. And again, this was something they came up with and they wanted. And I guess that's really exciting to me, because this has been a really long process. I mean, we started talking about some of the changes that needed to be made back in 2011, and here we are in 2020. But what we've seen over those 9 years, we've seen an absolute evolution in the kinds of things that our forecasters, our staff really likes to do. I really feel like over those 9 years, we've changed. I think we've changed our culture, and we've evolved from an office that was extraordinarily talented, but really enjoyed doing what they had always done, to one that now is driving our local change and is really impatient with the rate of change in our agency. And it's pretty cool to have the forecasters bringing suggestions for change and really working through these changes rather than having it come from the top down. And I really think that's a result of the entire office working together, going through some tough times and some conflict, and working through that, continually trying to improve and get to the other side.
Yeah, that's really is exciting. In fact, I'm sure you sometimes get, well, it must be nice, working in an office where everybody wants to change. But, your story sort of demonstrates that it wasn't always that way. But it's also a great takeaway that persistence and commitment and, patience and following the process the right way can sort of transform that. So to me, another equally exciting takeaway is that the Kotter model turns out to not only have sort of helped you work through the process of implementing the change, but now you have this new mindset where the staff themselves are initiating ideas for change. And so it's kind of reinforced a cycle of interest in service improvement and innovation. So that's really exciting, and I appreciate you sharing that story and sort of motivating, I guess, all of us that we could do this if we put our heads together and follow the right. And the vision is one that is that implementing it would prove to improve the way we provide services. That there's a path to get there, but it may certainly require a realization of obstacles that need to be overcome, and it takes time to adapt, but sticking with it could really produce results over the course of time.
Yep, that's exactly right, Kim. I think that's the biggest takeaway, that with the persistence and the commitment to follow the right steps, and we're able to keep everyone engaged, that I think any office can work together to overcome obstacles to kind of adopt these sorts of changes. The main thing, though, is it's not something you can do in 6 months. We have the benefit of time, and I think that's really important, not to rush things like this.
It's good counsel.
All right. Well,
thanks.
Kim and Andy, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is fantastic for all of us at Weather Service offices across the country to have this explicit example of how this model can be applied in our everyday work. And I also thank you for making this actual video recording work amid all the COVID crisis that we're contending with. I know we had more grand plans for production quality here, but I love that we were able to still make it work. We're the Weather Service. We just make it work, right? All right. Well, and to everybody who's watching, I just want to let you know on the Leadership Academy Google site, next to the link for this video, you'll find a handout that outlines the key points of the Kotter model and some notes about how Andy applied this with his team at Pleasant Hill. We also have some guiding questions in there to help you plan on how you could apply the steps at your office to try to get things accomplished. So try it out and let us know how it goes.